And I'm not saying it's wrong to be frustrated or how dare you be frustrated. That is not at all what I'm saying. My frustration is with the message that's out there as a whole for the pole community that inverts are important. No, inverts are a trick. Learning to invert there should be no more pressure on learning to invert than learning to pole. Hi guys, welcome to episode 6 of Pole Dance Rants. I'm Vina with StudioVina.com, a website where you can learn to pole dance at home with me. Today I'm talking about inverts. Whew, this is going to be quite the episode. You're going to want to listen the whole way through because I'm going to be covering a ton of stuff here. Inverts. The first thing I want to rant about is our obsession. Why? Why are we so obsessed with inverting? There are so many other ways to get inverted upside down. I don't understand why we are so obsessed with the deadlift invert. And I'm being specific with the deadlift, and I'm going to cover this later on. There is more than one way to invert. And it's safe and effective, and there's so much to it. And I'm not talking about just one or two ways. I'm saying there are multiple ways to go about doing what in pole dance we call an invert or an inversion. I think we are so obsessed with it because studios are obsessed with it. A lot of them won't let you go on to certain levels or what have you, which makes sense if you can't invert. However, as I said, there are lots of other ways that you can get upside down on your pole. So an invert is just one way. Take this for example. So when I started pole dancing back in, what would it be, 2008-ish, I'd say? I have to look and make sure. But when I started pole dancing, there was no tutorials online. There were some photos. And after I'd gotten a pole, then I discovered YouTube and found Terra Carina. So up until that point, the first few weeks I had my pole, I was doing what is called a half handspring to get up to the pole. Because in my brain, the skill level that I had, I was a personal trainer before, so I was strong, and I'm naturally gifted as far as learning things with my body goes. So to me, doing a half handspring, and I'll put a link down below if you don't know what that is, was the way that I thought would be best for me to get inverted on the pole. And I was a beginner. But it wasn't until I'd been dancing for a couple months that I discovered something called the invert, where you stand to the side of the pole and tip up, and now you're upside down. I didn't even know that was a thing that existed. So you can do all kinds of things, and I'm not saying that a half handspring is the next best thing. I'm just saying that the invert is not the end all and be all of pole dance. I can't tell you how many times I see people saying that they're going to quit pole because they can't invert. This drives me crazy for very, very many reasons. The first reason is there's so much more to pole dance than just doing an invert to get into a trick. Remember, for most of us, an invert is just a transition. So pick a different transition to get you into that same position. It's that simple. You don't have to stress over, I can't invert, so I must quit. There's never going to be anything I can do. There are lots of things you can do, and I'll cover that later on. And please make sure to read this description because there's going to be a lot of links to help you guys out, okay? Free links. So we're talking about the invert and the obsession with the invert. I get that it can be hard to go through your leveled classes if they require you to invert to move on. But maybe you should look at things a little differently and think, well, pole dance is about dancing with an apparatus. So you are missing out on a whole ton of connecting with your body, of finding new movement patterns if you're only doing tricks. So if you remove that aspect of, I must invert at all costs, invert is the main goal for everything. Remove that. Stop thinking that way. You have to realize that there is more than one way to get upside down on the pole. And then start to work around adding different movement and flow. Dance around your pole. If you're focusing on expression and dance, not being able to invert is not going to be a big deal because you will be able to still express yourself while standing on the ground and doing different transitions and staying upright on the pole if you want. There are so many things that you can do. So there's no reason to be obsessed with being able to invert, especially if you are a beginner. There are studios who teach inverts in beginner level classes. I strongly disagree with this. These studios may be well-intending, but they are doing you a disservice, and if your studio is one of those, you need to find a different instructor or studio. And I don't normally say flat out, no, you need to go somewhere else, but if they are teaching you that and pushing you to invert as a beginner, run. It's not okay. Remember, most people who are in a pole class, I'm not talking about the people who are naturally talented and they're going to do competitions and they're doing this performance and that performance. I'm talking about regular people like the folks I teach on my website who have jobs and kids and lives. Regular people do not need to stress about learning to invert. Can you learn to invert? Of course. Can I make it easier for you than what you've been learning and what you've been seeing online? 100% yes. But we also need to stop being so stressed and single-minded about invert. So that's my take on why we're obsessed. I know I kind of went off on a tangent, but we teachers and studios, online educators, we need to do a better job with explaining to people that an invert is not the end all and be all. Okay. The other thing you'll see is when somebody struggles with an invert, they're like, I want tips for an invert. And everyone's going to give you cues like, tip your head back, make sure that you lift your hips, do your knee tucks. It drives me crazy because everyone's just parroting each other and saying the same thing. If you do not have very strong lats, rhomboid shoulders, you are not going to be able, you can have the strongest abs in the world, but if you're lacking in your back, an invert that is nice and clean is going to be a huge struggle. So stop telling people to work on their core in order to invert. The core is only one aspect, and there's so much more that you need to be concerned with other than just core when you're talking about learning to invert. So let's go over four different methods of inverting, because that's what I was talking about earlier. You have, and this is the order in which I would suggest somebody learns, but there are howevers and what if or buts for all of these. So controlled momentum is what I suggest. Yes, I said the word momentum is what I suggest beginner inverters, not beginners, but those who are new to inverts, start with. Then you've got your lever or deadlift, and then the lift. The lift is where you're actually almost doing it aerially, but you're from standing, you lift your body up and then invert. So those are the four most common. The lever is the style of invert where you're going to brace the pole along your hip. And you might also, I suggest using your forearm when you're doing that, but that does not work for everyone. And that is not a great way to get into an invert if you are actually dancing. So things like deadlifting, using the lever, and lifting break the flow if you are dancing around. Controlled momentum, which is the way I teach you first, controlled momentum is the best way to keep moving through your dance without stopping to set up for an invert. Does that make sense? If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out the links. There will be links that show you the difference between all of these different styles of inverts. So before I continue, I want to talk about the difference between what I call a basic invert or an invert versus a chopper. What I see people trying to learn as a beginning inverter is to deadlift, so that means not use any momentum, into legs open in a straddle chopper. That is, aside from an aerial invert, the most difficult method and way to invert. It is not the best way for somebody who's new to inverts to get upside down. So, there are other aspects to this as well, but let's just talk about the terminology. So, the basic invert is where you are going to bring your legs up to the pole. You're not opening them into a V. You're not going into a Gemini. You're not doing anything other than getting upside down and clasping your legs around the pole. You're not straddling, none of that. That is your invert. Basic invert. I do not teach it on spin because you need to understand how to use the controlled momentum on static first. Spinning pole is all about deadlifting. So you need to learn your inverts on static. I only teach my invert on static. Then when you're ready to move on to the chopper, that's where in that tutorial you will learn how to spin forwards and backwards working on your chopper. That means your legs are in a straddle. This is a more advanced invert. So you have your basic or just your invert, legs come up to the pole. Then you have your, I call it a V invert, but most people call it chopper. Then you have your chopper. So it goes invert, chopper, aerial invert. Those are your levels of difficulty. So let's talk about prerequisites of things you should know before you work on your invert. I require that you can pole hold with your feet off the floor for 3 to 5 seconds or 1 to 2 breaths. I also ask that you work on a side pole hold with knee tucks, but that's only one exercise. That's not the main thing that's going to get you there. And then a basic pole climb, so not the pretty one, that's the performance climb where you use your forearm, the basic pole climb where it's all about building strength. It's harder. And then I want you to be able to do a chair spin and a pole hold spin. You don't have to do a bunch, but just a pole hold spin, because that shows you and me that you have the ability to hold your body weight. Okay. The other thing that's different about the way I teach inverts, and maybe it's caught on by now, I hope it has, because guess what? My Ultimate Guide to Invert series is 9 free videos. 9 free videos. They have always been free. They're completely free, and it's been out for at least 2 years. please use this resource. I made it for a reason. So after you've listened to this podcast, go to my website. I'm going to have the link down below. Bookmark, if you're working on inverts or you are an instructor, go bookmark the Ultimate Guide to Invert series. You can share this with people too. It is completely shareable. The person you're sharing it with doesn't have to be a member of the website. You can say, here, you're struggling, check these out. Maybe try these different methods. Okay. So the other thing, like I said, that's different about the way I teach inverts is I break it up into upper body and lower body because there's really two things happening. You need to worry about your upper body and what that's doing. Three things, actually, if you're using controlled momentum. You need to worry about timing and then what your lower half is doing. My dog. Quiet. So let's talk about upper body, just briefly, because I cover this in the Ultimate Guide to Inverts. You can use a push grip where you're using the elbow, a low grip. This is the one that you're going to use for a lever, or if you're somebody who is stockier and shorter, the low grip, where people are like, oh, you're gripping too high, put it below your chin. That is a low grip. If you're using a push grip, you're using the forearm and it's probably low as well. A high grip is where you're going to be reaching high and then lifting yourself up. So it's what you would use with the lift invert. And then a side grip, or side pull hold is what I call it, is your basic invert grip. This is the first grip that you should learn when you're working on your inverts because it will keep you safe. Why does that work? Well, because I am teaching you to do controlled momentum. Controlled momentum requires you to generate momentum so that you can more easily get up to the pole. This is not unsafe. I don't care what people say. They're like, oh, it's not safe to kick. I'm not saying you're kicking. There is a difference between doing whatever you can to get yourself upside down and using controlled momentum. If you are using controlled momentum, the first thing you learn is your correct grip. This is the most important thing because it keeps you from hitting your ribs, your hips. It keeps you connected to your pole so that you can use momentum without hurting yourself. If you do not understand the pole hold, check out the video. I will share it. It is free. And the important tip here is that you are bringing the pole into your armpit area and using this area to help keep you on that pole. It is not the same as allowing the pole to rest down here. It is not a side pole hold if you're not using that armpit area to help hold you up. That is the key for controlled momentum. If somebody is teaching controlled momentum or step and sweep inverts and not using a side pole hold, they are not teaching you correctly. The whole basis for the controlled momentum invert is that you are controlling your upper body so you're not slamming yourself into the pole. This will also keep you from jerking and dropping yourself out from that invert position. Okay. On to lower body. So for lower body, you need to understand your technique and your motion and timing of the step and sweep of the leg. Step forward, sweep the leg. Step forward inside, sweep outside. Step forward inside, sweep outside. And we drill this before you even go upside down. But once you understand the concept of the step and sweep and bringing your legs straight up to the pole, not in straddle, straight up to the pole, you can try different leg positions. You've got straddle, you've got tucked legs. You can tuck your outside leg first. You can tuck your inside leg first. You can bring your heel to the pole and then scoot your hips up. This is for those people who are very new to inverts. It's okay. You can sweep the outside leg, like I mentioned. You can do split legs where you're doing like a side split. You can do diamond legs. There are so many options for leg positions that can help you either get up to the pole more easily, or it can help you in what you want to transition into when you're using an invert to get into your next pose. So understanding and working with different leg placement and positions is very, very helpful. So I want to go back and talk about control momentum again, and why it frustrates the hell out of me that people are like, oh no, that person's kicking, you're gonna hurt yourself. Yes, you could hurt yourself if you're using the wrong grip and just trying to run up and get up as hard and as quick as possible. That is not what I'm teaching. That is not what I'm telling you to do. But what I want to cover is gymnasts use controlled momentum all the time. And just like pole dance, gymnasts help control their movements by using friction, just like in pole. That's why having tacky skin is so important. Gymnasts rely heavily on generating momentum with their bodies to actually complete a skill. That's all we're doing with controlled momentum. Even in pole dance, it's acceptable to use momentum to do flips. So why is it unacceptable to use momentum to get into an invert, to save your back and your shoulders extra strain? Especially when we tend to invert multiple times in one session. Why not take that strain off of your muscles, save that energy for the tricks that you're actually working on? It's like telling somebody to do a more difficult climb every time before they go to do a trick, instead of telling them to use a performance climb because it saves you energy. Save yourself energy and wear and tear on your body. I've been doing controlled momentum for, 15 years, 16 years. I've been teaching it for 15 at least, but I don't understand the pushback on this. If you understand the pushback, let me know. And again, it does not count if the people who are saying don't use control momentum are not using the correct grip. If they're teaching you to grip down low, or if they're teaching you to, lever yourself, that's completely different. That is not what I'm teaching. And I love using control momentum as the first introduction into inverts because it allows more people to actually achieve their invert. It doesn't matter your size or your strength level, more people will be able to do it because it's more about timing and understanding how to generate that momentum. So again, I'm guessing that the thought of any momentum is bad, especially in inverts, probably came from people who were aerialists and they started to teach, because on fabric, you're not going to run and, you can, but the way that the invert is universally taught is more like how you're going to do it on silks or tissue fabric. And that is not something that we as pole dancers have to put ourselves through. We have a solid pole that we can use our bodies and momentum to make it easier for ourselves. So why wouldn't we do that? Why would we force ourselves and our bodies to continuously strain them if we could do it a better way, or a more what's the word I'm thinking of? Like time-saving, effective way. You guys hear, I hope you can't hear all that hammering. They're working on a house back there. It's very distracting. So anyway, I think that it probably came from aerialists being obsessed with the fact that you have to do it in a very deadlift style. Okay. But if you have any ideas of why people are so obsessed with teaching the deadlift, let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Because again, I'm going to say it 1,000 times. If you are using a side pole hold, you will not run into the pole. If you are using and learning it properly, that is. If you're just trying to guess by watching, you probably will miss important cues. But if you are taking my courses or doing my 30-day invert program or doing my invert class, you do not have to be fearful about working on this by yourself, because I teach you to listen to your body. I teach you that you need to go through the right training before you even get to your inverts. So I would never tell somebody who's new to my website, hey, just go straight to inverts. No. Even if you are not a beginner, I tell people at least look at my beginner programs and familiarize yourself. My husband just got home. Because I teach differently. And it is so important that you build those fundamentals so that things like inverts do not have to be scary and take you an ungodly amount of time and energy. But again, I want to say, the invert is not the end-all and be-all of pole dance. If you cannot invert, that does not mean you should give up on pole dance. Why are you pole dancing? It's fun. If your class that you're taking is not fun and you're not enjoying it, find a different class. Maybe buy your own pole. Do classes online. There's all kinds. It's not just me. There's all kinds of people that teach online. Do not think that just because you cannot invert, you should quit. You might go your entire pole life and not do an invert, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. You're still a pole dancer. There are still many things that you can do on the pole that don't require an invert. That being said, let me talk about a few of the things you can do as an alternative, because I promised you I would. So let me see. You can do a no invert Gemini. I have a tutorial for that. You can do a cross ankle release. Of course I have a tutorial for that. A cross knee release. Yes, I have a tutorial. A reverse handstand or a reverse elbow stand. Those are just a few of the more commonly known tricks and ways that you can get inverted. Remember I said I was doing a half handspring to get upside down. Now, don't go freaking out and saying, well, that is an advanced move. Yes, half handspring is advanced. That is how I have labeled it, because for most people, that's going to be a real stretch, because you have to trust yourself to give yourself the momentum you need to kind of run under yourself and bring your leg up to the pole. So if you're not sure what that is, like I said, I'll put a link there showing what a half handspring or what a handspring looks like. You can also do cartwheel mounts. There are so many ways. And I truly believe that if you learn to do a controlled momentum invert, the person who feels they can never invert is going to be able to invert. But at the same time, I don't pressure people. I don't like to pressure people into feeling like the invert is super important, because it's not. What is super important is to understand things like building strength in your shoulders, your hips, your core, your back, and everything. Building strength, protecting your shoulders, understanding different grips and how to engage your body properly. Those are the fundamental things that are important for safe and practical pole dancing. Doing an invert It's just one trick. So if you're getting frustrated about not being able to invert, please remind yourself. If you're a teacher, please, for the love of God, remind your students, if you want to keep them, that the invert is just one trick. It should not be a requirement for everything. Yes, you can include it as a requirement to move up to certain levels, but then you need to make sure that the lower levels are still having fun choreography, fun tricks, engage with them. I think a lot of studios and a lot of online people get obsessed with teaching people the hard stuff because it makes them look better. It took me a bit to, it was a hard pill to swallow to say I'm going to focus on beginners, even though I was a more advanced dancer. I felt like I was telling people I'm only as good as a beginner. But then I started to understand that beginner is so important that I'm absolutely proud that people think of me as somebody who teaches mostly beginners, even though my website has really advanced stuff too, because the beginners have truly become, over the last 10 years, beginners I've realized are where it's at. They're new, they're fresh, they're coming into their own, and you need to help them build a strong foundation so that they can continue to progress or stay where they are and continue to safely practice their pole. All right, I'm going to take a look here quick at my notes and see if there was anything that I left out. If you have questions, please go ahead, leave them below. Like I said, read the description. I'm going to have links for you. Well, I don't see anything that I missed in my notes. So I hope this rant about inverts was helpful. And I'm not saying it's wrong to be frustrated or how dare you be frustrated. That is not at all what I'm saying. My frustration is with the message that's out there as a whole for the pole community that inverts are important. No, inverts are a trick. Learning to invert there should be no more pressure on learning to invert than learning to pole sit or learning to pole hold. Does that help? Take the pressure off yourself. It's just a trick. And there are other ways to go about getting upside down. So an invert does not mean you cannot pole dance. Remember, when I first started, I had no clue that an invert existed. So it's okay. You've got this, all right? Please check out the links. And if you have any questions or need any guidance or help, please reach out. I am absolutely more than willing and happy to help you.